The autumn breeze swept across Lake Michigan as Ann Ford Freeman stepped out of her Tesla Model X, designer briefcase in hand. At 36, she embodied success, senior accountant at Deloitte, mother of two, and wife to one of Chicago's most promising civil engineers. Her dark skin glowed under the morning sun as she straightened her tailored suit, preparing for another high-stakes day. 10 miles away, her husband, Jacob Freeman, 38, stood at the window of his corner office at Mitchell Construction Group. The Chicago skyline stretched before him, a testament to the structures he helped design. His latest project, a $200 million downtown development, would cement his reputation among the city's elite Black professionals. Neither of them could have imagined that in less than a year, their picture-perfect life would end in blood. "Girl, you won't believe what Madison did this morning." Ann laughed into her phone, talking to her younger sister, Kate. At 32, Kate Ford had recently divorced and worked as a high school guidance counselor. The sisters spoke daily, their bond strengthened by shared Sunday dinners and family vacations. "Let me guess, another ballet routine in her pajamas?" Kate replied, smiling as she thought of her 7-year-old niece. "Complete with curtain calls. Marcus tried to join in, but you know that boy has 2 left feet." Their comfortable routine masked underlying tensions. Jacob had grown distant over the past year, working late hours and traveling frequently. Anne attributed it to his rising career. The truth was far darker. That evening, the Freeman household hummed with its usual activity. Madison practiced pirouettes in the living room of their Oak Park Victorian home, while 5-year-old Marcus crashed toy cars into the sofa. Anne stood in their gourmet kitchen, phone pressed to her ear as she finalized details for the upcoming Black Professionals of Chicago charity gala. Jacob's headlights swept across the driveway at 8:45 p.m. Another late night. He loosened his tie as he entered, the scent of Tom Ford cologne still clinging to his crisp white shirt. "Daddy?" The children's voices echoed through the house. Jacob scooped them up, his bright smile masking exhaustion, or perhaps guilt. "Sorry I'm late, baby," he called to Anne. "The Harrison Street project is behind schedule." Anne nodded, used to the excuses. She didn't see the text messages he quickly deleted or notice the lipstick-stained receipt he'd thrown away in his office trash. After 15 years together, trust had become a habit. Later that night, as Anne slept, Jacob sat in his home office, scrolling through his second phone, the one Anne didn't know about. Names and messages filled the screen. Michelle from accounting, Jasmine from his office, Sarah from the gym, each one a secret, each one a potential disaster. But Jacob Freeman had always been careful. He chose women who had something to lose, who understood discretion. His charm and status made the seduction easy. The lies came naturally. "My marriage is just for show. We're separated, but keeping it quiet. You're special, different from the others." He'd perfected this double life, managing his affairs like he managed his construction projects, with precision and control. Until Kate. Kate Ford had always been different. As Anne's younger sister, she'd been part of their lives since college. She'd been a bridesmaid at their wedding, godmother to Madison, a fixture at family gatherings. She was off limits, untouchable. But something had changed after her divorce. Jacob noticed the subtle shifts, her longer glances, the slight tension when they hugged, hello or goodbye. During Sunday dinners, their conversations grew more personal, more charged. October brought unusually warm weather and a business trip for Anne. 2 weeks in New York for a major client audit. Kate offered to help with the kids, just as she had countless times before. "You're a lifesaver," Anne told her sister, packing her suitcase. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Kate hugged her sister goodbye, ignoring the flutter in her stomach when Jacob's hand brushed her shoulder in passing. Neither sister could have known that this ordinary moment, this simple family arrangement, would set in motion events that would end in destruction, disease, and death. The first night after Anne left, Kate stayed late after putting the kids to bed. Jacob opened a bottle of wine, and they sat in the kitchen, talking about nothing and everything. "Sometimes I miss this," Kate said softly. "Just having someone to talk to at the end of the day." Jacob filled her wine glass again, his fingers lingering against hers. "I know what you mean." The air grew thick with possibility. Later, neither could say who moved first, who crossed that fatal line. But in the dim kitchen light, surrounded by family photos and children's artwork, they betrayed the woman they both loved. The morning after brought shame and promises. "This can't happen again," Kate whispered, gathering her things before the children woke. But they both knew it was a lie. Over the next 2 weeks, while Anne called nightly from New York to check on her family, Jacob and Kate fell into a dangerous rhythm. After the children were asleep, wine turned to whispered conversations, which turned to stolen kisses in dark corners of the house Anne had decorated. "We should stop," Kate would say, even as she melted into Jacob's embrace. "We will," he'd respond, knowing he had no intention of ending things. When Anne returned, Kate pulled back, drowning in guilt. But Jacob wasn't ready to let go. He began texting her at odd hours, creating reasons to meet. "Can you pick up Madison from ballet? I'm stuck in traffic. Anne's working late. Come over for dinner with the kids." Each innocent request laid groundwork for moments alone. By December, their affair had become a full-blown secret relationship. Kate told herself it was different from Jacob's other indiscretions, not that she knew about those yet. She believed she was special, the exception, the one who truly understood him. "I've never felt this way before," Jacob would tell her, recycling lines he'd used on countless others. But Kate believed him. She had to. The alternative was accepting that she was destroying her sister's marriage for nothing more than a cliché. The holidays brought additional strain. Family gatherings became exercises in deception. Christmas dinner at the Freemans had turned into torture as Kate watched Anne lean affectionately against Jacob, while under the table, his foot sought hers. January 2023 arrived with bitter cold and the first signs that something was wrong. Kate developed a persistent cough that wouldn't go away. She blamed Chicago winters, took over-the-counter medicine, and ignored the growing fatigue that seemed to seep into her bones. By February, she couldn't ignore the symptoms anymore. Night sweats left her sheets damp. Her lymph nodes felt swollen. When a fever lasted 3 days, she finally made a doctor's appointment. "Probably just a nasty flu," the doctor said, ordering routine blood work. "But let's run some tests to be sure." Kate didn't think to mention her affair with Jacob. Why would she? He was her brother-in-law, a successful professional, a family man. The possibility that he might have infected her with something never crossed her mind. Meanwhile, Jacob's own health had been declining, though he hid it well. He'd been ignoring symptoms for months, years, really. The occasional night sweats, the unexplained weight loss he attributed to stress, the lingering coughs he blamed on Chicago's pollution. He'd canceled 3 physical exams in the past year, making excuses about his busy schedule. Deep down, he knew something wasn't right, but acknowledgement meant responsibility. It was easier to maintain plausible deniability. March brought warmer weather and Kate's test results. The doctor's office called on a Tuesday afternoon while she was counseling a student about college applications. "Miss Ford, we need you to come in as soon as possible to discuss your results." Those words, delivered in that careful professional tone, made her stomach drop. She scheduled an appointment for the next morning, then spent the night alternating between panic and denial. The doctor's office was quiet when she arrived at 8 a.m. Spring sunshine streamed through the windows, making the generic artwork on the walls seem almost cheerful. Kate's hands shook as she filled out the intake forms. Dr. Patricia Williams, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes, didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Miss Ford, your blood work showed some concerning results. We ran an HIV test as part of our standard panel, and it came back positive." The words "HIV positive" echoed in Kate's head like a death sentence. Her hands gripped the armrests of the chair as Dr. Williams continued speaking about viral loads, CD4 counts, and modern treatments. None of it made sense. "There must be a mistake," Kate interrupted. Since my divorce 4 years ago, I've only been with—" The realization hit her like a physical blow. Jacob, only Jacob. Dr. Williams watched understanding dawn on her patient's face. "Miss Ford, I know this is overwhelming. We need to discuss your recent sexual partners so they can be notified." "I can't," Kate whispered. "I can't tell you who." She left the doctor's office in a daze, barely remembering the prescriptions and referrals Dr. Williams pressed into her hands. In her car, she sat staring at her phone for 20 minutes before sending a text to Jacob. "We need to talk." Now, it's important. Jacob was in a project meeting when he got the message. Something in its terseness made his chest tighten. He excused himself, claiming a family emergency. They met at a small coffee shop in Rogers Park, far from their usual haunts. Kate was already there when he arrived, her hands wrapped around an untouched cup of coffee. "I'm HIV positive," she said without preamble, her voice barely above a whisper. "And you're the only person I've been with in 4 years." Jacob's face went ash-gray. The carefully constructed walls of his life began to crumble. "That's impossible," he started to say, but Kate cut him off. "Get tested. Today. Right now. I'll go with you." Her voice shook with rage and fear. "And if you're positive, you need to tell Anne." "Kate, be reasonable." "Reasonable?" Her laugh was harsh. "I just found out I have HIV because my married sister's husband, who I was stupid enough to sleep with, probably infected me. Don't talk to me about being reasonable." They drove in silence to Howard Brown Health Center. Jacob's mind raced through possibilities, excuses, escape routes. But Kate's presence beside him was like a prison guard, ensuring he couldn't run from this reality anymore. The rapid test confirmed what they both suspected. Jacob was HIV positive, with a much higher viral load than Kate, suggesting he'd been infected longer. "How long have you known?" Kate demanded as they sat in his car afterward. "I didn't. I never got tested before," he admitted. "There were some symptoms, but I thought." "How many others?" When he didn't answer, she pressed harder. "How many other women, Jacob?" He stared straight ahead through the windshield. "I don't know." "Does Anne know about any of them?" "No." Kate closed her eyes, tears finally breaking through her anger. "You have to tell her. If you don't, I will." "Kate, please, let me figure out how to—" "You have 24 hours, she cut him off, "or I'm telling her everything." She got out of his car and slammed the door, leaving him alone with the weight of his actions. Jacob sat there for a long time, watching the sun set over Chicago's skyline. His phone buzzed, Anne asking what he wanted for dinner. Jacob didn't go home that night. He checked into a Hampton Inn near O'Hare, ignoring Anne's increasingly worried calls and texts. In the sterile hotel room, he paced like a caged animal, watching the hours tick away on his 24-hour deadline. At home, Anne sat at their kitchen island, staring at her unanswered messages. Madison and Marcus had been put to bed, their innocent questions about Daddy's whereabouts adding to her growing anxiety. "He's probably working late, sweetie," she told them, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. She called Kate, hoping her sister might know something. The call went straight to voicemail. Kate lay in her own bed across town, her phone turned off, staring at the ceiling. The HIV medications the doctor prescribed sat unopened on her nightstand. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Anne's face, imagining the moment her sister would learn of the double betrayal. Morning brought no clarity. Jacob watched the sunrise from his hotel window, his phone showing 15 missed calls from Anne and a single text from Kate. 12 hours left. Tell her, or I will. At 9 a.m., he called his office and told them he had a family emergency. Then he sat down and began writing names, every woman he could remember from the past 5 years. The list filled 2 pages of hotel stationery. Some names he barely remembered. Others brought back vivid memories of hotel rooms, office encounters, and whispered promises. How many had he infected? How many had gone on to infect others? At noon, Kate turned her phone back on. There were 27 messages from Anne. "Have you heard from Jacob? I'm really worried. Please call me." Kate's hands shook as she typed a response. "Coming over. Need to talk." Anne was in her home office when Kate arrived. Papers were spread across her desk. She'd tried to work from home, waiting for news about Jacob. "Thank God," Anne said, hugging her sister. "Have you heard from him? I've been going crazy." "Sit down, Anne," Kate said softly. "We need to talk." But before Kate could continue, the front door opened. Jacob walked in, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "Where have you been?" Anne demanded, torn between relief and anger. "I've been calling." "Anne," Jacob's voice cracked. "We need to talk. All of us." They gathered in the living room, the room where they'd celebrated birthdays, Christmases, family milestones. Anne sat on the sofa, looking between her husband and sister, sensing the heavy atmosphere. "I don't know how to say this," Jacob began. "Just tell her," Kate said, her voice hard. Anne's eyes darted between them. "Tell me what? What's going on?" Jacob took a deep breath. I tested positive for HIV yesterday. The silence that followed was deafening. Anne's face went blank, uncomprehending. What? How? When did you? There's more. Jacob continued, his voice hollow. I've been unfaithful. Multiple times over many years. Anne's hand went to her throat. What are you saying? Anne, Kate's voice broke. I'm positive too, because... She couldn't finish. Anne looked at her sister, then at her husband. Understanding dawned slowly, horrifically. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Anne's scream shattered the quiet suburban morning. It was primal, raw, the sound of a heart breaking, of trust imploding, of a life disintegrating in seconds. How could you? She launched herself at Jacob, fists pounding against his chest. How could you? Then she turned to Kate, her beloved sister, her best friend. And you? With my husband? My husband? Kate sat there, tears streaming down her face. Anne, I'm so sorry. Sorry? Anne laughed, a horrible broken sound. You slept with my husband and you're sorry. Jacob tried to step between them. Anne, please. Don't touch me. She recoiled from him as if his touch would burn. How many? How many women? When Jacob hesitated, she grabbed the nearest object, a crystal vase, a wedding gift, and hurled it at his head. He ducked, and it shattered against the wall. Upstairs, they heard Madison's frightened voice. Mommy? The sound of her daughter's voice seemed to snap Anne back to reality. She took several deep breaths, her hands shaking. Kate, get out of my house, she said, her voice deadly calm. Get out and never come back. Anne, please let me explain. Get out! Kate fled, sobbing. As she reached her car, she heard more crashes from inside the house. Anne turned back to Jacob, her voice ice cold. The children and I will be staying at a hotel. When I come back, I want you gone. And Jacob, her eyes bore into him, I'm going to destroy you. She walked upstairs with remarkable composure, packed bags for herself and the children, and left within 30 minutes. Jacob sat in the wreckage of their living room, surrounded by broken glass and shattered photographs. By nightfall, Anne had checked into the Four Seasons with the kids and called her lawyer, Richard Thompson, one of Chicago's most feared divorce attorneys. In her hotel suite, after putting the confused and frightened children to bed, she opened her laptop and began documenting everything. She pulled up bank statements, credit card records, phone bills, years of them. Jacob's unexplained expenses, late-night calls, mysterious weekend business trips all took on new meaning. She worked through the night, fueled by rage and betrayal. At 3 a.m., her phone lit up with a text from Kate. Please, we need to talk. Let me explain. Anne blocked her sister's number without responding. Across town, Kate sat in her dark apartment, staring at HIV medication bottles and wondering how her life had imploded so completely. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jacob. We need to figure out what to tell people. She blocked his number too. Jacob, still sitting in their destroyed living room, finally began calling the women from his list. Most calls went to voicemail. The few who answered hung up when he mentioned HIV testing. One woman broke down sobbing, revealing she'd already tested positive months ago and had been too afraid to tell him. By morning, the story had begun to spread through their social circles. Anne's absence from work, Jacob's failure to show up at an important client meeting, and Kate's sudden sick leave from the high school created a vacuum that rumors rushed to fill. The Black professionals of Chicago Gala Committee met on an emergency Zoom call. Anne had been their president for 3 years, Jacob a major donor and sponsor. Now whispers of scandal threatened their biggest fundraising event of the year. We need to distance ourselves, Barbara Wilson, the vice president, said firmly. We can't risk the organization's reputation. Meanwhile, at Madison's elite private school, mothers gathered in tight clusters during morning drop-off, phones buzzing with texts and speculation. I heard he infected dozens of women. Did you know the sister was living with them? Those poor children. Marcus's kindergarten teacher noticed the normally bubbly 5-year-old had become withdrawn, bursting into tears when other children asked where his daddy was. At Midwest Construction Group, Jacob's company, the board called an emergency meeting. His secretary, Michelle, didn't show up for work. She'd called in sick the day after receiving his call about HIV testing. The liability issues alone, the company's legal counsel warned. If he used company resources, company time. By week's end, Jacob was placed on indefinite administrative leave. Kate's principal called her into his office. Parents have expressed concerns, he said delicately. Perhaps it would be best to take some time off. The local news hadn't picked up the story yet, but social media buzzed with barely veiled references. The black upper-middle-class circles of Chicago's North Shore were too small, too interconnected to keep secrets. Anne moved methodically, like a general planning a war. Her lawyer filed for divorce, citing extreme and outrageous marital misconduct. The filing included a demand for full custody and detailed Jacob's pattern of infidelity and reckless endangerment. She also filed a civil suit against him for intentional infliction of emotional distress and battery, arguing he knowingly exposed her to HIV. The complaint asked for $10 million in damages. Richard Thompson, her lawyer, warned her about publicity. "This will get ugly," he said. "Are you sure you want to go this route?" Anne's response was steel-edged. "He didn't just cheat on me. He didn't just sleep with my sister. He brought a deadly virus into our marriage bed. I want him to pay." Jacob's own lawyer advised him to settle quickly. "The discovery process alone will destroy whatever's left of your reputation." But Jacob, facing professional ruin and mounting medical bills, couldn't afford Anne's demands. His assets were frozen by court order. The board was moving to force him out of his company. Former lovers were beginning to contact lawyers of their own. Kate tried to return to her apartment one evening to find homewrecker spray-painted across her door. Inside, her answering machine blinked with messages from her ex-husband. "I always knew you were trash." The children suffered most. Madison overheard a classmate's mother telling another parent that her father was that man with AIDS who slept with everyone. She came home crying, asking Anne what AIDS was. Anne scheduled HIV tests for herself and the children, enduring agonizing days of waiting. When the results came back negative, she collapsed in her hotel bathroom, sobbing with relief. The Chicago Tribune broke the story on a rainy Tuesday morning. Prominent Chicago executive faces multiple lawsuits over HIV exposure. Though they didn't name Kate directly, the article mentioned a family member among the infected parties. By noon, 3 local news vans were parked outside the high school where she taught. The school board placed her on paid administrative leave, pending review. Students posted TikToks about their teacher who slept with her sister's husband, garnering hundreds of thousands of views. Jacob's world collapsed further when Michelle, his former secretary, went public. In a tearful interview with Channel 7, she described a 2-year affair that started with late nights at the office and ended with an HIV diagnosis that had already strained her marriage to breaking point. "He knew," she insisted. "He had to have known." More women came forward. A real estate agent, a pharmaceutical sales rep, a young paralegal. Each story followed a pattern: business meetings that turned personal, promises of discretion, eventual ghosting. The civil suits multiplied. Jacob's lawyer quit when he couldn't pay his retainer. His replacement was a harried public defender who advised him to consider bankruptcy. Anne's own HIV test came back negative again, but her doctor recommended regular testing for the next year. Each visit to the clinic was a reminder of betrayal. The children started therapy. Madison, at 11, understood enough to be angry. Marcus, too young to grasp the complexity, simply missed his father and couldn't understand why he couldn't go home. Kate lost her teaching license when the state board cited moral turpitude. She sold her car to pay for medications and moved in with a college friend in Rogers Park, avoiding the windows in case reporters were outside. Their parents, retired in Florida, stopped taking calls from either daughter. Their mother's last text to Kate read, "How could you do this to your sister?" Anne threw herself into work, but even there, she felt the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. Clients began requesting different partners at her firm. Jacob, now living in a studio apartment in Irving Park, started drinking heavily. When his company officially terminated him, citing moral clauses in his contract, he barely noticed. His savings dwindled as he paid for lawyers and HIV medications. One evening, drunk and desperate, he showed up at Kate's new apartment. "We could leave," he slurred. "Start over somewhere else, together." Kate slammed the door in his face. The scandal spread beyond Chicago. National news picked up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about sexual health and betrayal. Medical journals cited the case when discussing the need for routine HIV testing in monogamous relationships. A producer from a true crime podcast reached out to Anne, offering to tell her side of the story. A women's magazine wanted to profile her as an example of resilience in the face of betrayal. She refused them all, focusing instead on her children and her lawsuit. But every time she drove past their old house, now on the market as part of the divorce settlement, she felt the weight of what she'd lost. The Black church community that had been the center of Anne's social life for 15 years quietly divided itself. Some rallied around her, bringing casseroles and offering childcare. Others, particularly those with business ties to Jacob, maintained a careful distance. First Lady Jenkins, her pastor's wife, pulled her aside after service. "Sister Anne, perhaps you should take a break from the youth ministry, just until things settle." The scandal touched people in unexpected ways. Jacob's elderly mother had a minor stroke after reading about her son in the newspaper. She refused to see him in the hospital. Marcus's kindergarten teacher noticed other parents requesting their children be moved away from him at story time. She fought back tears as she explained to the principal why she was requesting a transfer to a different school district. Kate received a letter from a former student. "Miss Ford, you taught us about integrity in advanced placement English. You made us read the Scarlet Letter and talk about moral choices. Was it all just words to you?" The HIV support group she joined met in a church basement on Tuesday nights. There, at least, she found people who understood the medical fears, the stigma, the way HIV in 2023 was still viewed through layers of judgment and shame. Anne's lawyer called with updates on the civil suits. 5 more women had come forward, all HIV positive, all linked to Jacob. They wanted to join forces, create a united legal front. The total damages could exceed $50 million, Richard Thompson explained. But collecting might be difficult. He's burning through assets faster than we can freeze them. Jacob, struggling to afford his HIV medications, applied for assistance programs. The intake counselor recognized his name from the news. Her typing seemed especially loud as she processed his application. Madison started acting out at school. Her grades dropped. She got into a fight with a girl who'd shared one of the viral TikToks about her family. "I hate him," she told her therapist. "I hate Aunt Kate. I hate that everyone knows." The therapist suggested family sessions. Anne refused to participate if Kate was involved. Kate's college friend asked her to move out. "My boyfriend's not comfortable," she explained awkwardly, "with the HIV thing." She found a tiny studio in Rogers Park, in a building where no one seemed to read the news. At night, she graded papers for an online education company under a different name, trying to rebuild some kind of life. Anne received an unexpected call from Jacob's former business partner. "There were signs," he admitted. "Company credit cards used at hotels, expense reports that didn't quite add up. We looked the other way. I'm sorry." The apology meant nothing. She added his name to the civil suit the next day. Their older brother David, a doctor in Milwaukee, finally broke his silence with a group text to both sisters. "Mom and Dad's 50th anniversary is in August. They want a small family celebration. They're asking that Kate not attend. Anne, they understand if you want to skip it too." Anne sat in her new condo's master bedroom, surrounded by moving boxes. The divorce settlement had forced the sale of their family home, but she'd managed to find a place in the same school district. The children's stability was her priority now. Her phone buzzed with a reminder: Marcus's first therapy session with the new child psychologist. The previous one had suggested play therapy might help him process his abandonment issues. The words made her want to scream. At his bare-bones apartment, Jacob stared at his laptop, scrolling through job listings. His industry had quietly blacklisted him. Former colleagues wouldn't return calls. He'd started delivering for DoorDash at night, wearing a mask and baseball cap to avoid recognition. The civil suits were moving forward. His lawyer had explained in basic terms he'd likely face judgments he could never pay, possible bankruptcy, wage garnishment for years to come. The criminal investigations were worse. Several states had laws about knowingly exposing others to HIV. Kate found work teaching English online to students in China. They didn't know her story, didn't judge her past. During day hours, she wrote product descriptions for e-commerce sites under a pseudonym. The HIV medications made her tired, but she was learning to manage the side effects. Her therapist suggested writing letters to Anne, not to send, but to process her guilt. She filled notebooks with apologies, explanations, and pleas for forgiveness. Then she burned them, one by one, in her bathroom sink. Madison started seeing a new counselor who specializes in adolescent trauma. In their sessions, she drew picture after picture of her family, always with Kate and Jacob scribbled out in angry black crayon. "Can you tell me about these figures?" the counselor would ask. "They're dead to us now," Madison would reply. Anne threw herself into work, rebuilding her professional reputation. She transferred to her firm's corporate litigation department, away from family law, where her personal story felt too raw, too close. Her HIV tests continued to come back negative, but each visit to the clinic reopened wounds. She joined a support group for partners of sex addicts, finding some comfort in stories that echoed her own. Jacob's mother recovered from her stroke, but refused to see him. Through family friends, he learned she'd revised her will, cutting him out entirely. His father's only communication was through their lawyer. Kate missed her sister with an intensity that physical hurt. She drove past Anne's new condo sometimes, late at night, just to see the lights on, to know her sister and the kids were okay. One evening, she saw Madison in the window and quickly drove away, crying. Their parents' 50th anniversary approached. As requested, Kate sent her regrets. Anne decided to attend with the children, but the celebration felt hollow. Family photos were awkward, missing pieces obvious to everyone. The HIV advocacy community reached out to Kate, asking her to share her story. She declined. Some wounds were still too fresh, some truths too painful to speak aloud. One Sunday, Anne ran into Michelle, Jacob's former secretary, at Whole Foods. Their shopping carts collided in the produce section. Both women froze, recognition and shared trauma passing between them like an electric current. "I'm sorry," they both said simultaneously, neither sure exactly what they were apologizing for. The autumn chill brought changes. Anne's law firm made her partner, partly, she suspected, to prevent any discrimination claims. The promotion came with a corner office overlooking Michigan Avenue, where she spent late nights building cases and rebuilding her life. Madison started 7th grade at a new school. Anne had finally given in and transferred both children away from the whispers and stares. On the first day, Madison used her mother's maiden name during roll call. The teacher didn't correct her. Jacob's criminal trial dates were set for spring 2024. 3 states had filed charges related to HIV exposure. His public defender suggested plea deals, but the terms were harsh: significant prison time, sex offender registration, lifetime monitoring. He stopped delivering for DoorDash after a customer recognized him and posted about it on social media. The gig economy, it seemed, offered no anonymity. He found work at a warehouse using a friend's social security number, working night shifts where fewer people would see him. Kate's HIV had stabilized with medication, but the psychological wounds proved harder to treat. She started volunteering at an AIDS outreach center, finding purpose in helping others navigate the maze of healthcare and social services she now knew too well. One day, she saw Marcus at Target with his nanny. He spotted her too, his small face lighting up for a moment before remembering he wasn't supposed to love her anymore. He turned away quickly, but not before she saw his lips quiver. Anne received an unexpected call from Jacob's mother. "I'm dying," the older woman said without preamble. "Cancer. I want to see my grandchildren before I go." The request opened fresh wounds. Anne agreed to supervised visits, but refused to allow any contact with Jacob. His mother didn't argue. The civil suits moved toward settlement. Jacob's assets were gone, but the women pressed forward, wanting official acknowledgement of their suffering. Kate joined their lawsuit, a decision that made headlines again. Sister sues sister's husband in HIV exposure case. Madison found the article online. That night, she cut up all her childhood photos that included her aunt, then asked Anne if they could move to California, where nobody knows us. Anne considered it briefly. Her firm had offices in Los Angeles, but running felt like letting Jacob win somehow. "We face things," she told Madison. "That's who we are." Kate received a letter from her ex-husband. He was remarrying, wanting to inform her himself before she heard it elsewhere. The letter included a check, repayment of an old debt, but she couldn't bring herself to cash it. The money felt tainted somehow, like everything else from her old life. Jacob's drinking worsened. He missed shifts at the warehouse and lost that job too. His HIV doctor expressed concern about medication compliance and warned him about developing drug resistance. One night, drunk and desperate, he left a rambling voicemail for Anne. "I never meant, I loved you, I still, the kids, please." She played it for her lawyer the next morning. The restraining order was extended. Their brother David's wife gave birth to a girl. The birth announcement arrived at Anne's condo with a handwritten note. "We understand if you don't want to be the godmother anymore." Kate received no announcement at all. The autumn breeze swept across Lake